As we get started, let's pray. God, we give you thanks for today. We give you thanks for all of the ways that you have been present today. God, for the ways that you have surprised us, for the ways that you have sustained us and gotten us this far through our Monday. God, for just bringing us to this place, we are grateful. Pray that our conversation tonight would be full of love and be full of wisdom. God, that you would draw us to ask questions of one another and questions of this process. God, I give you thanks for the openness of St. Matthew's and for the willingness to even gather tonight. God, be in this time. Open our minds and our hearts, our hands and our feet to receive you. We love you and praise you. Amen. Amen. So those of you that were here on the earlier end, if I'm giving a lot of information to a group, I am one who I'm a visual learner, and so that is why you have these handouts. I am not going to read you every word of these handouts, because that is also ineffective. And you can read, and you can take these home, and you can fall asleep with them on your chest. You can wake up at 2 a.m. and there will be, I trust that you can dive into these as you have more questions. But these 3 sheets are going to frame our conversation tonight. So I know some of you have been here for the last 2 weeks, the last 2 sessions. Some of you have not, so just a quick recap. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the theological approaches that draw us to this conversation. We talked about different ways to interpret scripture and how a lot of times our deeper theological divides are actually what bring us to this conversation. Then last week, there was a discussion about the history of Reconciling Ministries Network and the history within our book of discipline of how the rules have really changed around human sexuality over time, but how this conversation is one that we've been having really since the beginning of the United Methodist denomination, right? The United Methodist Church was formed in 1968, and in 1972, language was added to the book of discipline against homosexuality. And so really from the beginning, this has been a conversation. So we did theology, we did some history. Tonight hopefully begins the answering of lots of your questions about the process itself. I know that there are a lot of questions about what is the Reconciling Ministries Network. So I wanted you to see their mission and their vision statement and their strategic directives. So I am going to read you the mission and vision because they're really powerful statements. And we talked a little bit about this last week, but we didn't get really into the depths of it. So the mission statement of the Reconciling Ministries Network, and this comes directly from their website, which we've given you over the last couple weeks, but it's now on paper, so you can see it there as well. The mission is living into our shared baptismal covenant. Reconciling Ministries Network equips and mobilizes United Methodists to resist evil, injustice, and oppression as we seek justice for people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. So that middle line of resist evil, injustice, and oppression, that comes directly out of one of the questions we ask when someone is baptized and when new members join the church, right? That is a question that as clergy we say, do you promise to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves, is the question. And so Reconciling Ministries Network, that is their starting point. That anything less than justice for people of all sexual orientations and gender identities goes, in their minds, against that baptismal covenant. So that's where they're starting from. That's their mission. The vision of the network is that Reconciling Ministries Network envisions a renewed and vibrant Wesleyan movement that is biblically and theologically centered as committed disciples of Jesus Christ. We strive to transform ourselves and the world by living out the gospel's teaching of grace, love, justice, and celebration of all of God's children. Right, so this network is grounded in our theology, and it's grounded in Scripture, and it really believes that we have these roots in our Wesley tradition. And so when it says the Wesleyan movement, that could mean, while right now it is mostly United Methodist churches that are joining the network, it could be a larger group. It could be members of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. It could be members of just the Wesleyan denomination. There are like many branches of, they're not all Methodism, but many branches of Methodism that are grounded in John Wesley's teaching. And the network envisions a renewal for all of those congregations. So it then goes through these 6 strategic directives, and we're not going to go through each of them, but these are just ways that the network envisions living out their mission and their vision, right? So these directives are pretty broad, but the network really works to resource churches and to resource communities that want to be more inclusive, and says we need to support these congregations, we need to support these communities, but we also need to work for systemic change. We also need to be working to change the book of discipline, that we can't just continue operating how it has been, but that in order to really do this mission of seeking justice for people of all sexual orientations and gender identities, we have to change the current laws. Questions on their mission, vision, strategic? Okay. So we have heard a lot of questions about, if we join this movement, are we still United Methodist? The answer is yes, right? The Reconciling Ministries Network is just that. It is a network within the denomination. If we vote to join this network, it does not separate us from the United Methodist Church. This network is under the United Methodist Church. So we would stay United Methodist, we would stay within the denomination, but we would align ourselves with congregations that have already gone through this process and who are, again, working for this vision and mission statement. And we're going to get into some specifics of reasons, but we stay United Methodist. That is like a big rumor going around St. Matthew's, is that if we become Reconciling, we are leaving the Methodist Church. That is false. And so my hope is that you would tell all your friends that that is false. And when you hear that, that you would do some teaching for the folks that aren't here, that if we become a part of this network, we are still United Methodist.
Since there is an active movement among all the churches across the nation to look at the issue of division within the church, and has been since last February, what is your understanding of where this particular network falls in that discussion? Is it an advocate for further division of the United Methodist Church, or an advocate for reconciliation, not only with the particular gender preferences of particular members, but among the churches as a whole? What's your understanding where the network's coming from on the overall church's issues?
So the network has backed a couple different pieces of legislation that are going before General Conference in 2020 that call for some kind of separation. Again, there's a lot of different ways that separation could happen. It could happen all within the United Methodist Church, like we are all still United Methodist and there's different branches, right? It could happen where there are 2 or 3 completely new denominations. No one would still be United Methodist. There are, and then there's variations of those 2.
Right.
Right? So Reconciling Ministries Network, again, is for justice, for justice of all sexual orientations and gender identities. And they have fought from within the United Methodist structure since their formation. And they, I mean, our policy and our structure can't change unless it happens from within, right? Even if that changing from within then causes a split. It can't just be, I mean, unless financially large, like churches just decided to leave and buy their way out, which hardly anyone can do right now. They recognize that the change has to come from within, so they're working to do that. They're working with members of the Wesley Covenant Association, which we discussed last week, is the traditional network that has formed. So they're working with the other side in many ways to say, how can this, if a division has to happen, how can it happen so that we both walk away with what we're hoping to walk away with. We don't know, again, there are lots of plans, and right now we just know the broad brushstrokes of them because they haven't, the legislation itself isn't public yet. And then there's typically 1 or 2 plans that Reconciling Ministries Network will come out in favor of and will come out against prior to General Conference. That doesn't mean that every Reconciling Ministries congregation or delegate is going to vote that way, right? But as a network, they will say, here's what we're supporting and why. Yeah. And just because if we were to align with Reconciling Ministries Network and say a division happens, it would not bind us to anything that the larger network does.
Since the network itself is an extreme, this is my words, extreme minority movement within the United Methodist Church, comprising only about 1,800 congregations out of over 32,000, meaning it's less than 7% of all the churches that make up United Methodism. Why do you think this is a good way forward for this particular congregation, since we've been emphasizing being inclusive for well over 2 decades almost?
Yeah, we're gonna move there tonight. I promise we're gonna move there tonight.
Well,
I promise tonight. Tonight you are gonna hear that. But before we go there, I wanna talk through the steps of how to get there. I wanna talk through the steps, because that was the official thing we were gonna teach you tonight. So the official thing we're gonna teach you tonight, I'm gonna talk through, and then literally it says reasons to affiliate, reasons not to in my notes. So the steps to affiliate with the movement. These 2 sheets, 3 sheets, came directly off of RMN's website. So we've talked a little bit, but there are 3 different types of reconciling groups. There's a reconciling church, where the entire congregation votes to join the network. There's a reconciling community, which could be any of these things that are listed. A Sunday school class, a youth group, 1 UMW circle, the choir, any group within the church could vote on their own to become a reconciling community. These groups tend to vote to become a community if their church has voted not to and they are against it, or if the church is just not ready to take that vote and the small group decides they want to. So for example, my home congregation in Delaware, we passed a welcome statement that is similar in some ways to St. Matthew's welcome statement 15 years ago. Then the congregation was not ready to join the network. Then a small group that was essentially our like mission and outreach team decided that they were ready. They as a mission and outreach team said we're ready, and they became a reconciling community about 6 years ago. And so they as a community were listed on Reconciling Ministries website, all of that, but it was not the whole church. And then just this past summer, the whole church decided that the church was now ready to join the network. And so that reconciling community option is there. And just that group would vote and make the decision. Church members who were not a part of that group would not be allowed to participate in that vote. It would just be small groups vote. And then the last is a reconciling campus ministry. So on a college campus, college students voting to join the network.
Isn't there another way though, where you can affiliate with it individually, because they list over 41,000 people who've actually done it in personally as opposed to either one as a group?
Yes, so these were just the 3 different types of reconciling groups, but you can also go online and right on the RMN network.org homepage, it says join as a reconciling individual, and you just fill out your name and contact information, and then you are registered as an individual, and you will get the updates from Reconciling Ministries. You'll get, most of their updates are public, but you can make a individual stand and add to that number. So some of the individuals in that number are part of a congregation and some are not. And that's just something you can decide individually. But in order to have your group affiliate with the network, there are these 4 steps. The first is to craft and adopt a statement that affirms LGBTQ persons. This step is one that we have already done, right? Post general conference, in the surveys that we got back, we overwhelmingly heard that the congregation wanted a welcome statement, and that there were not a whole lot of questions about that welcome statement, so the task force was created to have a welcome statement. RMN suggests that we not only welcome, but that we affirm or we celebrate that language is in our welcome statement. And so that was taken into consideration by the task force, and that is the language that is in our welcome statement. Such as, we choose, y'all have read this, yes? Yes? Okay, the welcome statement? Okay, I'm not gonna read it to you. It's on the front of every bulletin now. So we have done step 1 already. We have done, I should say, part of step 1 already. So at least in this PDF, the movement has adopting a welcome statement and becoming part of the network all as step 1. It says to create the welcome statement, but then to take this vote that adopts the welcome statement by 75%, which is what we used as our bar of adopting the welcome statement. And this assumes that you are both going to adopt the welcome statement and become part of the network. We separated those steps because there were a lot of questions about becoming part of the network, and there was overwhelming support about writing a welcome statement quickly. But the 75% vote is the same percentage that we will use when we vote as a church. And so this is the part that is tricky, because there is nothing in Reconciling Ministries Network that says how to do this vote. What has been done by the majority of churches is that the church requests for the district superintendent to be present, and that the church uses this 75% as the line for what needs to be passed. So that is the process that we are doing.
75% of whoever's present at the
Whoever's
vote.
present at the vote. Yes. This also doesn't say whether they have to be official members of the church or just part of the church family. So with our welcome statement, we cast it wider, and it was, if you consider yourself part of the St. Matthew's family, you can vote. And that will also be the process for becoming reconciling. Is that if you consider yourself part of this community, you may vote. Step 2 is that we would complete a form that is about half a page long, that literally just lists our name and address and contact information and a copy of the welcome statement. And that we would complete that form and take this photo, step 3, and submit our application. So there are not a ton of formal steps from Reconciling Ministries to join the network. There are additional recommendations, such as each person in the congregation who feels comfortable with it signing up as an individual, right? So they can capture kind of the number of people that are in these churches that are part of the movement. There is suggestions of giving, and there's suggestions of keeping the welcome statement visible. But again, there's no requirements in that last section. There's suggestions, but there's no requirements. Really, the only requirement is this 75% vote. The only requirement, I should say, that we have left in this process is a 75% vote and a picture, and to submit. The work of the welcome statement is really good, hard, beautiful work that has been completed. So now it is the part of voting. Any questions about this process, or where we are in it, or what this says or doesn't say?
Can we take a survey of how many people can be at different times to vote?
The vote will be held in January, obviously, when the district superintendent can be present. That's what she said, from what I've heard. Have you heard anything different?
No, that is also what I've heard.
Is it a private vote or a show of hands, or how does that work?
That's up to us. We did the vote of the welcome statement by ballot, and that is what we've talked about doing again, just so that everyone can vote their conscience and not be worried about their neighbors seeing how they vote. The welcome statement passed, I forget the exact numbers, but it was around 97 or 98%. But we also know this is a more complex vote than just a welcome statement, right?
Has there been any discussion about possibly giving a specific time frame and doing online voting?
Yeah.
So you get a bigger net of participation?
That has not. We have talked about absentee ballots if you're not able to be there that night, or that day. Again, that time has not been set yet. It's hard because
Have
there's
you
not a
asked if the
process.
DS has had a previous vote of a congregation and whether or not there's any precedent in her experience for guiding the process?
So this is a brand new district superintendent.
That's why I'm.
She just came on board in July. And their congregations have done it lots of different ways, even throughout our conference. They've done it where you can do an absentee, they've done it where you can't. They've done it where you have to prove that you're, like my home congregation said, if you are if you live more than an hour and a half away right now, but are like still a part of this community, so like for college students, for others, if you were traveling during that time, you could still vote. There's a lot of different options. For the welcome statement vote, we did take absentee ballots from folks who couldn't be there.
Was that announced?
No.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, right?
Yep, so I will say, like, it was not what we were encouraging, right? And so, there were a few that emailed in and it wasn't gonna matter one way or another. We haven't decided the absentee process, yet, but it is being talked about. And other ways of voting is being talked about. But we do wanna make sure that, like, only one vote is being cast per person, right? We wanna make sure that this is a fair process. So it is being talked about.
Has any consideration or discussion been had about how we go about including members who are either homebound or ill or in a nursing facility and getting that out, the vote out to them as well?
Yeah, so that's also part of the absentee conversation,
Okay.
recognizing that not everyone can be here in person. Yeah, it's hard right now in not knowing when that vote will be. Yeah. Other questions on voting process?
Just to
Knowing
com-
that I can't answer it,
Just a
but I'm trying.
comment.
I'm trying.
If we're opening that aperture wide open, that leaves the question of people of diminished capacity and whether they are really voting or somebody's voting for them.
So how do you determine what the real vote is, a valid vote, so to speak?
Exactly.
Again, we would wanna make sure that it's one per person. And trust that this is a part of a faith community, right? And trust the honest and integrity of that hopefully members of that person's family are also not like filling out their presidential ballot, right? And like other things, but we just have to trust.
Can I
in that.
speak to that for a moment?
Yeah.
As a power of attorney and having to do those things for my mother with diminished capacity, is that on an absentee ballot, there is a space in there where you have to certify if you help with the ballot and why, and prove that you have a legal reason to do that.
So
Or
you-
you're legally allowed to do that.
So you can do like by a notary or a witness. That's how we do it with stuff at work too.
Some sort
Yeah.
of certification.
Certification, yeah, because I have to do
Exactly.
that with my mom too.
Good. I'm gonna write that down. I'm like.
It doesn't really answer my concern, but that's okay.
You have to trust Rich,
I know.
that's really what it's down to.
Any other questions about this process?
My concern is that, okay, we had a 75% vote or higher when we voted on the welcoming committee. But there wasn't, that was the people that were present, which usually is not 75% of the congregation.
By far. I agree.
And if we're then saying we're gonna do the same thing, it's gonna be, the numbers are gonna turn out pretty much the same. I would think that this would wanna go before the entire congregation, because if 50 people make a decision for 300, that doesn't sound fair.
And there weren't any families and children at that group.
Yeah.
Right. Are the youth that have been through community and are now full members of the church gonna be included in this vote?
Yes, and youth younger than that could vote, right? If we're saying that you don't have to be a member, then younger than confirmation could also vote.
At
Right.
what point do you draw that line? I mean, you're gonna ask your 3-year-olds, you know,
That'd
Well, I
be a
know my
little ridiculous.
13-year-old who hasn't gone through confirmation could make the vote, but 9-year-old could not.
Yeah.
Well, as long as it's certified or witnessed.
I don't
Seems to
have
me
any
this
of
is
that.
an area where the ad board really ought to get involved about setting the parameters
Mm-hmm.
for the decision
Yeah.
about how to actually present a decision like this to the whole congregation. So
Yep.
I must admit, I think a formal decision-making body ought to actually set the parameters
Yes.
for a church-wide participation. So I think,
Yep.
I must admit, that's the way I would approach it myself. And I think that's consistent with the disciplines, actually
Yeah.
making these kinds of things.
Work it out.
Yeah, so there's, yes, and again, there is nothing in our book of discipline to say how this vote should happen, right? There's nothing in our social principles, like, there's nothing in official documentation to say how this vote should happen. And so, we have been consulting with dozens different pastors who have been through this and have said, this is what I would do differently. This is what we did, and I'm really glad we did it. But some of this is also, this accountability and feedback is really great, and some of it is also when it comes time for the vote, hoping that you are trusting that we are doing the best we can. And that the process is messy, and we wish that there was more written down. Yeah.
For the 10% that are too foggy to understand what we've just said, Betty and I have belonged to this church for 20 years. I'm just going to use my family as an example. I think my son has darkened our door 5 or 6 times in that 20 years. According to what you just said, he could come and vote.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is he still a recognized member of the congregation, Richard?
Of this congregation? No. But that's not what she said.
No, I
Does not
agree.
have to be a member, just has to be able to fog a mirror.
Again, we're trusting that if someone is gonna come to this vote, they care about this congregation.
I might like to suggest to you, Gary, that you were talking about having the ad board do the parameters, is that since part of the parameters of it is who can vote and who's defined as membership, perhaps we need to spend some time between now and whenever we're voting to clean up the membership rolls, so we know exactly who the members are.
Well, that's actually a part of the charge conference. You're supposed to make an annual report for the membership
Yeah.
and who's on, who's not, who should be
Right.
withdrawn because they haven't participated.
Right,
That's actually part of the charge conference
Yeah.
process,
Yeah.
which will occur in November.
right. And the book of discipline tells you how to do that.
That's an excellent suggestion.
Yeah, and it also tells you how to handle college students who are like, I guess, I forget what the correct term is, I call them part-time members. But there's a special designation for those
Yes, there is.
people.
I worked with a former colleague that worked in risk communication. I remember one of the underlying theories that he had was called the DAD theory. Decide, announce, defend. And that was a recipe for failure. And I can just, even you can feel the tension just rising here. Like, somehow you have to, no matter which side of the spectrum you're on, you need to get buy-in from the congregation that whatever is decided, whether it's secret ballot or a limited group of people that are just there, whatever, you need to get buy-in from a lot abroad. That's all I have to say about it. I just think we need to get a lot of buy-in, whether they're there to vote or not, to tell them afterwards that, yep, 50 people decided this is what we're gonna do. You're gonna create chaos.
My point exactly.
Question. How long, I don't know if you know this answer, on an average, how long does it take a church to make this decision to go through the process. I did some research on my former church that I grew up in. They became a reconciling church in 1998. They spent 4 years going through the process, and I'm trying to reach out to talk to somebody that may still be there, as far as, you know, why did they take so long? What were the, you know, the impact?
Yeah.
You know, pros, cons, whatever, just to get an idea, because that church is very similar to St. Matthew's. That's why I came to St. Matthew's years ago.
Yeah, so we
So-
know it really varies from congregation. Churches are, again, the process is not technically on paper long, right? Churches are making that decision individually. We know that more congregations are doing this process faster since General Conference 2019 in response to what happened. We also did not want for us to go through this process really quickly and for 6 months down the line, everyone be like, wait, what did we just do? And why did we just do it? Right? Like, by the numbers of the surveys that came back in February, we could have taken the vote the next day and it would have passed. Both a welcome statement and joining the network, it would have passed. But we wanted to make sure that this was an informed decision. We wanted to have these longer conversations. We wanted the fire of General Conference to die down a little bit and for us all to bring our questions. But the numbers of churches, like, and I wish I had the exact number that has joined since 2019's General Conference, but it is in the hundreds of churches that have joined.
What does a reconciling church look like? I mean, what is it, besides just accepting LGBTQ and marrying them?
Yeah.
What else does it
So
entail?
I wanna move to pros and cons of joining the network, knowing that, so next week, the conversation is all on what it could look like. Like, the title for next week's conversation is, what would this mean for St. Matthew's? And we're gonna get into, this is what it does mean, this is what it doesn't, here are other options of how to live that out. And if we have more time tonight, we can come back to that. But I wanna just highlight, so the one handout that you have is 10 reasons to join the network. These again come right off of Reconciling Ministries site. I'm honestly not gonna spend a lot of time on this because I'm gonna spend a little bit of time, but not a lot of time because it's here in front of you. And we've been talking a lot about the pros of joining the network for the last couple of weeks and really for the last many a months. And so I wanna spend some time on reasons why churches are not joining the network and the cons of it. But a few just to highlight on this list, I think first and foremost that number 10, right, that joining the network is a statement that we are a congregation that is inclusive in love and unconditional in welcome. Saying what our welcome statement says, but saying it a little more officially, right? Which moves to number 9 of, if we were to join the network, it would connect us to other people and other churches that are already doing this work. It puts us, if a visitor is looking for an inclusive church in the Methodist connection, the first place they're gonna look is RMN Network, if they're plugged in, right? When I moved to Detroit, the first thing I did was Google in the Detroit zip code the reconciling congregations nearby. And that was where I went first. It's not where I ended up, but that's where I went first. And so it connects us to, others, really. Then jumping to number 6, it really, adds on to that momentum that has already been building post-general conference, of the movement itself, and draws us into this work of advocacy, this work of changing the book of discipline, this work of to change our current rule book, right? And it like going into kind of to summarize number 1, 2, and 3. It allows us to again like officially say what we have unofficially been living into, right? St. Matthew started this conversation about whether or not to become reconciling more than 10 years ago. It was like the first time that it came up. And y'all like seriously thought about it 10 years ago. And decided then was not the right time. So in some ways, St. Matthew's journey to becoming reconciling is more than 10 years old. And internally, as soon as you walk in the doors of St. Matthew's, this is a place that is inclusive, right? It's in our liturgy, it's in our welcome, it's now on the front of our bulletin, like it is seen if you show up. But it's not necessarily as seen to someone who is seeking. But there are some cons of joining the movement, right? By having this vote in January, some are going to leave. Some are going to leave if we decide to become reconciling. And honestly, there are folks who are going to leave if we don't decide to become reconciling. Right? There are folks who have said, I have waited for too long and I need to be in a place that is fully inclusive and really is ready to make that public. So we've heard from both sides that simply by having this conversation, simply by taking a vote, it's a risk. By joining this movement, it is taking a stance, and for some, it is a political stance, right? It's a, there are some who say we're not ready for this to be something that St. Matthew's is known for. We're okay being quiet about it, but we're not ready to take that stance. And there, for some congregations, that is like, and maybe for us, that is okay. Maybe we're not ready. Maybe we're not. There's also the concern that by taking this vote and by joining the network, that this is going to be all that St. Matthew's is known for. Right? We've heard that a lot. If we become reconciling, are our missions programs going to stay the same? If we become reconciling, how does that change our children's ministry? If we become reconciling, how does that change? Will funding for the music program still be there? Right? We have heard that concern, and that is a fear, and that is a worry. And that would be all that we are known for in the community, right? That the narrative of St. Matthew's would
Forbid same-sex marriages.
Mhm.
Anytime that you're considering alternatives, one of the alternatives is to do nothing. I don't recommend that. And primarily because all one has to do is sit in the choir loft on Sunday and look out into the congregation, and you realize that we're worried about outnumbering the congregation.
Yes.
And so
I'm worried
we've got
about
to
that
do something.
Yep.
And if something is going to bring more people into St. Matthew's without destroying St. Matthew's, I'm in favor of that. However,
That's a big if.
I'm not so sure that I am, all excited about joining a group which is an advocacy group to the point where, we could get drug along in their aftermath, and they're gonna say, well, this is what you've gotta do to be a part of this group. So, you know, we need to be a little cautious about what we're signing up for.
Have they ever done that?
No.
'Cause the group's been around for 40 years, right?
Yeah, but there's so many changes over the next 4 years.
Just,
Yeah,
you can, I mean, that's true for anything, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Nobody's a psychic.
Well, I don't,
Right.
I don't believe the use or affirmation even of inclusion has been a divisive factor in the loss of significant numbers of our membership.
Agreed.
There are a number of other factors at work in the church at large, at work in the community, it's changing demographics, at work in this community with its changing demographics in the sense that it's growing older and we've been losing more than we've been gaining on the other end because the community itself hasn't been as assertive and aggressive about growing children, youth, and families as it has in losing older people in the congregation through death and movement and to other types of living conditions and those kinds of things. So I think we have to recognize that although this is risk, and I agree with that 100%, okay, that the risk, and we need to think it through a little bit, but let's be quite honest that being inclusive hasn't been a divisive factor in the past for us, okay? That's the point I'd like to really to take off. But having said that, as Chelsea has tried to point out, this is an attempt to draw a sharper line in the minds of the public, the membership, and the community, okay, about what this church stands for. And that sharper line, which undermines that this is not merely a inclusive congregation, it's a reconciling one. In that sense, it's an attempt to draw a line of difference between us and other congregations in the community and perhaps other attitudes that might be present in the community. That's the risk that she's underlined quite clearly, okay? And that's the one I think that needs to be addressed very clearly when the congregation actually contemplates this decision, so that it's clearly articulated that people understand this shouldn't be simply an emotional decision, because it's going to have broader consequences than the previous affirmation had when we said we were inclusive. It troubles me to hear Chelsea say, well, people don't look at the inclusive statement we just spent all of our effort on earlier. That bothers me a little bit, because I actually thought that was an important thing to do. And it sounds like it wasn't as important as some of us who participated and voted for it thought.
Don't get me wrong, that was a huge important step.
Yeah.
That was like, and people have come, who have come to worship, who have read that, have named having that on the front of the bulletin made a difference.
And it's on the wall.
And people who have taken that bulletin to their kids or their grandkids or so-and-so who's mad at the church right now and said, this is what our church has said, there's a place for you here. Right, which like, that is huge.
It is.
There's a place for you here, but we can't marry you. You can't become a pastor. You can't, you know, that's kind of, okay, we love you, we'll take you in, but we can't do A, B, C, D, and E.
But the reconciling congregation is not gonna solve that, it needs to be.
Hey, that's my point.
But they are
It's-
working, like,
Yes.
it is supporting the group that is working to make that change.
Yeah.
And we'll get into
Your
this
point
next
is very
week.
important. It doesn't automatically change the discipline to
No.
associate with
No.
this group.
Right.
But but there are also, and we're gonna get into this next week, of, if we're going to really continue, what it means to be inclusive, what all that could mean. Because there are clergy right now who are performing same-sex weddings. And there are congregations who are saying you can get married in our building. And even if the pastor is saying that they won't do the wedding by themselves, churches that are saying you can do the wedding here. And congregations that are financially supporting clergy who are currently brought up on charges, right? And there's like a lot of possibilities for what more this could mean, if this is the direction we're going. We have to decide whether that's the direction we're going, and it might be yes, this is the direction we're going, and joining the network and having our welcome statement visible is what we're gonna live into for however long, right? But it may also mean having some more conversations of what are we gonna allow, what are we gonna advocate for, what are we gonna do?
I know some conferences, after the special conference came out and said that some of their bishops recommended that if they were gonna, take a stand, that they would do the weddings, that they do the liturgy but not the vows, and they not sign the marriage license.
Yeah, again, that's up to every individual pastor.
Well, that was a way that maybe they wouldn't get their fanny in the fire.
Well,
Yeah,
one of
but
the
it's also, yeah.
four strategies suggested in February was local decision, and that was defeated,
Yes.
unfortunately.
And either way, whatever comes next, St. Matthew's is gonna have to make some local decisions, right? So we're gonna pick up on local decisions, same time, same place, next week.
Can I
Or
ask one
next
question?
Tuesday.
It's kind of bothered me a little bit. I mean, we all know there's some financial issues going on in St. Matthews, that the budgets are being cut and things like that. That's no big secret. It's my understanding to become a full member of the Reconciling Ministries Network, it's about $1,000. Can we afford that?
No.
So, it's in here, there's no cost to join the network. There's
Even if there were, it wouldn't be an issue.
Well,
and there's a recommendation for a gift to
Yeah,
give.
yeah, it says a recommended
There's a recommended
donation.
amount, but there is no obligation. There's no financial cost.
It wouldn't, $1,000, even if it were a mandatory thing, would not be a barrier for this church, let's be quite honest. The issues are much more significant than simply $1,000 barrier. I mean, if that were the issue, probably most of us right here could contribute that if that's what we felt strongly enough about. Is this the issue on which we want to draw the line? That's really the question.
But I do, there is that rumor as well, that it is financial cost to us. And so that's another rumor, that as educated people in this room, if you hear that, I'd love for you to say, no, that is not a requirement, because it's not.
It's not a requirement.
Um,
I agree.
Do we still have a function on Sunday night this coming weekend also?
Yes, so
Okay.
this
Sunday
coming,
and Monday?
yes, so this coming Sunday night at 7 p.m., a local congregation is a few members of their community are gonna come, and they have already gone through the reconciling process, and they are gonna talk to us about their experience. Their experience with the process, their experience with the aftermath of the vote, all of that. That's Sunday at 7 in the sanctuary.